Imagine turning your surrounding environment into this sweltering, totally stagnant sauna where the air is so heavy you can barely breathe.
Sounds awful.
Right. But doing all of that just to trick a captive animal in a glass box into thinking a massive, life-altering weather event has just arrived.
It is a pretty wild concept.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a super fascinating, highly specific journal entry from May to 2026.
Yeah?
It's written by an author named Ang, and it's titled The Monsoon Effect, Simulating Seasonal Triggers in Fishkeeping.
And it's important to note this is specifically part 247 of their ongoing notes.
Yes, part 247. I mean, the dedication is just incredible.
Oh, absolutely.
But the mission for you today, listening to this, is that we are diving into this meticulous documentation of a miniature ecosystem to uncover, honestly, a pretty profound lesson about nature.
Right, because biological life doesn't actually thrive on perfect constant balance.
Exactly. It relies entirely on the sudden, sharp disruption of its environment.
Which is, it's a counterintuitive way to view nature, but a highly accurate one.
Yeah, we tend to visualize ecosystems as these, harmonious, slowly evolving spheres, right?
Right, like a peaceful painting. But the mechanisms driving survival and reproduction are usually built around sudden environmental shocks.
Right.
So today isn't just an analysis of aquarium maintenance, it's really a study of environmental contrasts.
Yeah.
We're going to look closely at the extreme physical properties of a stifling urban cityscape and how those external physics literally force an indoor artificial mimicry of a wild monsoon.
Because the environment Aang is operating in is totally crucial to understand before we even look at the fish tanks.
Oh yeah, you have to set the stage.
Aang paints this incredibly uncomfortable picture of the weather outside their home. Officially, they are in the middle of the rainy season.
Right.
But ironically, the nights are just punishingly hot and stifling. It's not like a refreshing rain. It's this oppressive blanket.
And the physics of that discomfort, they're driven by two main environmental culprits working at the same time.
Okay, let's unpack this. What's the first one?
So the first is extreme humidity. When the air is highly humid, it essentially acts like a sponge that has already absorbed as much water as it can physically hold.
It's full.
Right? It's reached its saturation point. And this creates a severe problem for the human body.
Because we regulate our internal temperature through sweating.
Precisely. Your body pumps water onto the surface of your skin, expecting the surrounding air to absorb it and, take the heat energy along with it.
But if the air is already a full sponge...
Exactly. The air's vapor pressure is completely maxed out, so your sweat physically cannot evaporate.
Ugh, that is the worst feeling.
The heat transfer is blocked, so the sweat just sits on your skin, and your body heat remains trapped within you.
Like a literal feeling of claustrophobia.
Because the atmosphere itself is rejecting your body's attempt to cool down.
Wow. And then Aang introduces the second culprit, which just compounds the misery, the urban heat island effect.
Right.
We hear that term thrown around a lot in, urban planning, but Aang's notes highlight the brutal physical reality of living inside one during a humid, windless night.
Yeah, because the urban heat island effect is entirely a product of the materials we use to construct our world.
Concrete, asphalt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dense brick. These materials possess massive thermal mass, so unlike a forest canopy or a field of grass.
Which reflects solar radiation.
Right, and allow the soil to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
But concrete absorbs solar energy deep into its structure all day long. It just drinks in the heat.
Then the sun sets, but the temperature doesn't drop.
Not at all.
Aang perfectly describes the concrete as bleeding out the heat. And since the winds have slowed down, there is nothing to move that saturated air away.
So you're just standing there baking.
Yeah, imagine you're standing in the middle of a city, and the entire metropolis is essentially a giant concrete storage heater. And somebody accidentally switched that heater on, full blast, inside a completely sealed steam room.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize the sheer physical weight of that environment.
It sounds so miserable.
It is. Heat radiating from the pavement up through your shoes, buildings radiating heat inward from the walls, and the ambient moisture just hanging motionless in the air.
You're trapped in a stagnant, sweltering bubble.
Right. And that trapped, unmoving heat is actively threatening the miniature ecosystem Aang is responsible for inside.
Yeah, because the walls of a house only offer so much insulation. Eventually, that oppressive ambient stagnation dictates the internal reality of the room.
which then warms up the water in the fish tanks in the outdoor pond.
So the fish are totally insulated from the actual rain falling outside, but they are fully exposed to the stagnation of the heat.
Exactly. And so the keeper must intervene. Otherwise, the water simply mirrors the dead air of the room.
And what happens in the wild when the water gets like that?
Well, in the wild, a prolonged dry season means rivers shrink. The water volume decreases, the ambient temperature rises, and toxic waste from decaying organic matter becomes highly concentrated.
Oh, that's not good.
No, oxygen saturation plummets. So fish in those wild environments, they enter a physiological holding pattern.
They're just surviving.
Right, their metabolism slows, their biological imperative is purely survival, they're just waiting for a rescue.
Which arrives in the form of a monsoon.
A massive, violent influx of thousands of gallons of cold, highly oxygenated rainwater.
And that instantly dilutes the concentrated toxins.
Yes, drops the ambient temperature rapidly and radically alters the chemical makeup and pressure of their environment.
So what does this all mean for the fish in captivity? How does a simple bucket of tap water translate to a seasonal weather event for them?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, when Aang stands in front of that aquarium or the pond and performs a water top-up.
Dumping in fresh tap water to combat the stagnation of that concrete steam room.
Right. They aren't just doing a weekend chore. They are playing the role of the monsoon.
That's so cool.
They are triggering an ancient evolutionary response. The aquatic animals detect the sudden drop in temperature and the influx of fresh oxygen.
Through a specific organ, right?
Yes, through a specialized sensory organ called the lateral line, which runs down the side of their bodies.
Oh, wow.
They literally feel the distinct change in water pressure and current. So this artificial influx completely replaces the natural cue they're missing in captivity.
The fresh water acts as a direct biological messenger.
Exactly.
Let's zoom in on a specific case study from the journal to see how fast this message is actually received, because this part is amazing.
Oh, the Zebra Cichlids.
Yes. Aang provides this brilliant, slightly humorous observation of a Zebra Cichlid pair in one of the tanks.
Yeah.
Literally, the moment the final water top-up hits the tank, the second that artificial monsoon is initiated, the male Zebra Cichlid's behavior undergoes a radical shift. It's instant. He immediately abandons whatever baseline activity he was engaged in, and he just begins relentlessly pursuing the female to mate.
There is no gradual buildup.
None. There's no acclimation period.
Aang notes that the male's pursuit is so sudden and intensely overwhelming that the female actively retreats and is observed still hiding behind a terracotta pot.
Which is such a vivid visual.
It's hilarious. It's like someone unexpectedly throwing a romantic switch that the other person wasn't quite ready for.
Right. 1 minute, they're just floating in the stagnant, warm Tuesday afternoon water.
They're chilling.
Yeah, just chilling. And the next second, the water temperature drops a few degrees, and the male is acting with the frantic urgency of a species trying to repopulate the Earth before the clock runs out.
It really illustrates the raw, unadulterated power of biological programming.
It does. I mean, we tend to anthropomorphize animal behavior, imagining that they process environmental changes the way we do.
Like they're weighing the pros and cons. Right. But these fish are not consciously reasoning out the benefits of their new environment.
They aren't having an internal monologue about how, the sudden drop in temperature historically correlates with an incoming abundance of microscopic food sources,
Right.
making this the optimal fiscal quarter to invest in offspring.
Not at all. Over millions of years of evolutionary pressure, a hardwired neurochemical connection has just been forged.
So they just react.
The lateral line senses the temperature delta, which instantly triggers the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis.
Say that 3 times fast.
Right. But essentially, hormones flood the system. It is less like a conscious decision and much more like an alarm bell ringing in a fire station.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, the firefighters don't sit around debating the chemical composition of the smoke.
Oh.
The bell rings, and their bodies are pre-wired to slide down the pole and get to work.
The environmental trigger is pulled, and the behavioral cascade fires automatically.
Exactly.
But wait, I have to challenge this logic because Aang's notes lead to a highly counterintuitive hypothesis here.
Okay, go for it.
If a sudden influx of clean, cool, highly oxygenated water is the ultimate trigger for breeding, because it signals peak survival conditions for the babies,
Right.
then from a purely biological standpoint, shouldn't a continuous, nonstop flow of that exact same perfect water lead to continuous, highly successful breeding?
It seems like it should.
I mean, why wouldn't evolution program a fish to maximize reproduction in an environment that never degrades? Like, if I give them a pristine, perfectly flowing stream all the time, shouldn't that be better than just dumping in a bucket of fresh water once in a while?
It's the central paradox of this entire study, and Ang addresses it directly.
Oh, they do.
And Ang asks, would a continuous ongoing water flow to simulate a moving stream increase the likelihood of mating?
And the answer.
The conclusion is a very firm, not really.
Wow.
To understand why your logic, which makes perfect sense on paper, by the way,
Thank you.
fails in biology, we have to look at the severe energetic cost of reproduction.
Ah, okay. Building eggs, fighting off rivals, defending a territory against predators. It burns a massive amount of caloric energy.
An unsustainable amount. If an organism attempted to breed continuously, it would quickly deplete its energy reserves, weaken its immune system, and inevitably die.
Taking its unprotected offspring with it.
Exactly. Evolution heavily penalizes organisms that waste energy. Therefore, breeding has to be restricted to very specific, highly advantageous windows of time.
But if the water's always perfect, isn't it always an advantageous window?
Here is where we encounter the concept of homeostasis.
Homeostasis.
Yes, it's a state of physiological and environmental equilibrium. A continuous flow of pristine water maintains perfect homeostasis.
It keeps the oxygen levels optimal and the spawning site immaculately clean.
But a perfectly stable environment sends a very specific signal to the organism. There is no rush. Tomorrow will be exactly as hospitable as today.
Oh, wow. So absolute perfection actually breeds biological complacency.
It becomes background noise. If the alarm bell in the fire station rings constantly 24 hours a day,
It ceases to be an alarm.
exactly, it just becomes the ambient sound of the building.
Yeah.
The firefighters stop reacting to it.
That makes so much sense.
In the same way, the biological switch governing reproduction requires a contrast to be flipped. It requires a delta, a measurable difference between state A and state B.
That is deeply profound. I mean, we spend so much of our lives and dedicate so much of our technology to engineering perfectly frictionless environments.
We really do.
We want the climate control in our homes set perfectly. We want our workflows completely seamless. We assume optimal, unchanging conditions will automatically yield optimal results.
Right.
But Ang is proving that perfect, constant conditions do not stimulate life. Disruption does.
The fish must experience the relative stagnation. They actually have to endure the warmth and the creeping toxicity of the older water to properly react to the cool, fresh influx.
Wow.
As Ang specifically observes, it's that sudden change of fresh water that mimics an actual rain that flips the biological switch.
Because it creates urgency.
Exactly. The disruption signals a narrow, fleeting window of opportunity. It screams, the resources are here right now, but they won't last forever. Act immediately.
A catalyst. The fish tank isn't just a container holding a static environment. It is a stage where a catalyst is deployed.
Well said.
Let's trace the journey we've mapped out today for everyone listening. We started out in the sweltering, oppressive reality of a concrete cityscape at night.
A truly miserable setting.
Right. We unpacked the physics of trapped humidity and thermal mass bleeding heat into windless, stagnant air. We felt the physical weight of an environment that refuses to let life cool down or find relief.
A backdrop of total environmental stagnation.
And then we moved indoors to watch how a hobbyist combats that exact stagnation. And not by installing a system that provides a perfectly stable, unchanging, continuous stream of utopian water.
No, by introducing a sudden, jarring shock.
A bucket of cold tap water that acts as an artificial monsoon, violently disrupting the homeostasis of the tank.
And we saw how that single contrast triggers a neurochemical cascade so powerful that a Zebra Cichlid completely abandons its baseline behavior,
To frantically pursue a mate.
leaving the female sheltering behind a terracotta pot just to survive the intensity of his biological override.
It totally dismantles the illusion of constant perfection.
It really does. In biology, a state of unvarying optimal conditions is just a dead end for action.
Yeah.
It is the contrast, the sharp, unmistakable disruption of the norm that serves as the true catalyst for life.
It is the contrast that sparks the fire. And that brings us to a final thought for you to carry with you today. We've spent our time looking closely at the miniature, captive world of a fish tank. We've unpacked exactly how a sudden shift in water chemistry and temperature triggers an ancient, unavoidable biological response.
Right.
But think back to that sweltering, unmoving, urban heat island Aang described at the very beginning of the journal entry.
The concrete steam room.
Yeah. If the ultimate biological switch for living creatures isn't found in a state of continuous perfection, but rather in the sudden sharp shock of disruption.
What dormant biological switches might exist in the natural world trapped outside?
Exactly. Out there, suffocating within that stagnant, heat-bleeding, concrete jungle, just waiting for the wind to finally shift and the true monsoon to break.
It's a fascinating thing to think about.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.